So, yeah, your study was about the alleged radicalization ramifications of viewing YouTube was released back in December. That's right.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was a study you co-authored with someone at Berkeley, I believe, which is where I'm right next to, actually. And I took a look.
Anna Zaitsev.
Okay. Yeah, I took a look at that, and I'm not a social scientist or even like an amateur social scientist. So I could see and easily grok and understand things like, the daily impressions and what looked to me like the kind of things that the YouTube algorithm is recommending if you're to watch Joe Rogan or if you're to watch Current Affairs. It's a magazine, but it has a YouTube channel as well. The Intercept has a pretty nice YouTube presence as well. And then more mainstream things like, The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. So you see what kind of videos are recommended by viewing that. Did that study also say where people were coming from when they landed at a Trevor Noah video, and not just where they went after that? Because it looks kind of like.
So it couldn't say either. It's just an estimate for that, because we're looking at the recommendations on a video as like an anonymous user. We're not tracking what people actually were shown. So we're just trying to get it by proxy. So this is like by visiting all these videos every day, we accumulate like the average pattern, and we try and work out, well, based on how much that video was viewed, how many impressions we think, we estimate would have been displayed if kind of the anonymous recommendations average out to be what the personalized ones would be.
At Recluence, you can see it looks to me like more right-wing websites are located at the bottom of the graphic, and more left-wing is at the top. Or is that sort of am I looking at like more marginal or peripheral sites versus more mainstream sites?
So what it is, it's called a network. Oh man, I've forgotten the name of the exact. It's a type of network chart where the channels are positioned by simulating forces between them. Force-directed graph, thank you. And so the channels that are more that are recommending each other are attracted, and just in general, all the channels repel each other, and this is where they end up. And it is a natural. It means that channels will cluster together that are recommending each other and will be far apart if they're not. So each time I update the data, you might see left wing at the bottom or left wing at the top or on the right. The orientation doesn't matter at all. It's the relative positions between the channels.
Okay, so you could have a site that gets a lot of impressions, and so it will be displayed with a very large circle relative to others. But that could be, let's say it's Fox News, very large circle, but that still could theoretically be distanced very far away from a much smaller circle that's also right wing, just because the viewership doesn't overlap that much.
That's right.
Okay.
And what's interesting now is that, and this has changed from when I first did it, the conspiracy channels all hang around Fox News because they've cracked down on the recommendations to conspiracy videos. Most of their recommendations now go to Fox.
Huh. So Fox is also considered like ultra mainstream, but I think of Fox as sort of like this black sheep within a family that is mainstream or something, because it does actually seem adjacent to these sort of increasingly controversial, when I say increasingly controversial, I say something like even free speech, but then also actually controversial like conspiracy websites. They really do kind of congregate around that in a way that, say, left-wing conspiracy sites don't congregate around MSNBC.
Yeah. And there's much less left-wing conspiracy sites.
Yeah. Which that actually gets to sort of the methodological or political philosophical question, because it does seem to me like, just taking conspiracy in general, it has a more right-wing flavor, even though in theory it should not, right?
Yeah.
My own reasoning is that that's because anything that's somehow not on the progressive script, which is more transparent, more visible for everyone to see, kind of ends up being lumped in with the right, even if the people involved in it would declare to the end of the day that they are left-wing. So I think there's something going on is more legible as far as what it is that they're signed on to. It's much more kind of trend driven. It's on script. This is what it means to be on the left. And a whole variety of heterodox things that include both people who are self-consciously right and self-consciously left is all sort of in this murky, vaguely right-wing zone that includes conspiracy people,
And sometimes, like, some conspiracies tend to straddle that. And I think, like, anti-vax kind of straddles left-right. So you've got like, my stereotype, you've got some Californian hippie doing all natural stuff is kind of there's a lot of those type of anti-vaxxers, and they do like funny diets and healing things as well. Yeah. And then you've got the anti-establishment kind of anti-vaxxers where this is just the authority trying to control you. But often that's talked about as a...
We hear about like the Marin County anti-vaxxers, and so Marin County kind of the the socioeconomics of Marin County, the demographics is actually you're not in California, but I think you probably already know where I'm going with this. It's educated and upper income, and yet they're weirdly sort of signed on to this position that is more associated with uneducated, low-income people as far as distrust of science, So I wonder how much Marin County, though, is actually an exception to the rule. Or even if it is an exception, it should still be thought of as more important precisely because it's upper income and educated, right? So when they get it wrong, they have less of an excuse to.
But I guess look at it's been a while since I looked at it, but I looked at a chart about breakouts of whooping cough, and it was there's plenty in California, so it tracks that a bit.
Yeah, I first heard about how Marin County was sort of counterintuitively as a wealthy Bay Area suburb showing up on this chart lumped in with sort of the science resisting anti-vaxxer types that we think of as being in rural areas, homeschooler, religious influenced. That was a couple of years ago. Maybe it was in the context of news of whooping cough, but I remember seeing that it was the Central Valley, California, which is more rural and poorer. You had the anti-vaxxer sentiment there in deeply sort of Republican counties or, right-wing party counties here. There is kind of an overlap between that and in Marin County. As far as head count goes, even in California, there's more right-wing anti-vax than left-wing anti-vax. Right.
Yeah.
And so the Marin County thing got all of this news precisely because it's almost like a man bites dog thing. Like we expected to be better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fascinating the way that the politics break down of these weird overlaps. Yeah, when I think of anti-vaxxer, that woman who was on Saturday Night Live years ago now she's a big Christian and Republican. God, I forgot her name. She had a very sort of mousy, babyish voice. She wasn't on the show long. She wasn't famous like Chris Farley or something, but yeah. But she's within the celebrity community, so you think she'd be left, but then she actually stands out because she's kind of a black sheep within the celeb. Sort of like the point I was making about Fox being mainstream and yet peripheral within the mainstream in a sense.
They seem to they recreated other cable news, but as just an explicitly right-wing party. But they'll still talk about can't remember their slogans, but it's about objectivity and truth still, or started out like that.
Yeah, I remember Fox's, I don't know if it was a slogan or motto exactly. Well, there is fair and balanced. But then they've also said that, we make no pretensions about, or we have no pretensions about being totally objective, but at least we're honest about it. And the mainstream media are all dishonest about it. And I now that I see kind of the heterodox, old liberal, conservative thing getting mixed up with a free speech ethos, it's kind of unfortunate that Fox says that, because that's a sort of like might makes right. That's not correct. But yeah, Fox basically suggesting it's all about, crypto motives and politically motivated stuff, but at least we're honest about it. It's sort of a bad look right now as free speech ethos is trying to be defended against a kind of power politics thing that's becoming popular. So
but I think they're kind of right. I think the real, I'm not sure that everyone believed in it, But the idea that you could be a reporter reporting purely objectively, as if there was a stance that could be objective like that, was possible. It never really was. It's all about trying to be, like, the best you could do is try to be fair and honest about what your biases were, is like as good as you can do. And there was a kind of like a naive goal where it's like they said that that's what they were doing, but they weren't. That's kind of right.
Yeah, I feel like right now it's more important than ever to hold on to this sort of objective ideal. And yet there are all of these notions running up to this big crisis that we're having that you heard floated in the 2000s. For instance, there's a guy named Jay Rosen who was at Columbia School of Journalism, I think. And he was saying that this view from nowhere, quote unquote, was always kind of a phony thing, sort of a facade, and that we should just own up to these commitments, these specific political commitments, and stop this broadly liberal thing. And thinking like that sort of paved the way to where we are now. Even the irony of 2000s era Jon Stewart kind of paved the way to where we are now. And I don't know if we can really like stare reality in the face that way and yet hold on publicly to an ideal of objective free speech, liberal norms. So it's like we're having this private conversation that leaks too often into the public, and yet we expect to have this publicly made commitment to objectivity and free speech norms. We're all too cynical and in the know for that. And yet there is something valuable in holding on to that.
Well, anyway. It's definitely eye-opening to like listen to journalists on Twitter and then listen to them in their articles. Like especially recently, tech journalists about something like Clubhouse, where there's like a falling out between certain VCs and tech journalists, and then you read really negative articles about Clubhouse written in that objective format. They're just reporting on what's happening, but the reason why the article exists is just because they're fighting back.
So you said Clubhouse? There's something called Clubhouse that is associated with Silicon Valley, like the Silicon Valley versus the Northeast journalistic establishment. This thing that's becoming sort of visible now. You're saying there's something called Clubhouse associated with the California group?
That's right. Clubhouse is like a new social media that's just audio, but it's not. They're not released yet, so it's just invite only at this point. And there's a lot of Silicon Valley types on there, plus a few journalists and others.
Okay, interesting. So this is a social media that's audio only. So instead of tweeting sentences that you read, you tweet little audio snippets, or?
Yeah, this is all secondhand. So you've got rooms, I guess, with topics or people that are known for that room that moderate it. So it's just a self-moderated system, and it's designed for creating conversations. So you got like certain people that can talk, and they can invite others to talk. You can put up your hand and wait for your turn. A lot of features to do with that. So there was this kind of positivity and excitement about it, but then with this falling out with tech journalism, that changed, and then now the reporting on it is that it's got lots of problems.
It's just another gab in the making. It's just another. That's kind of like the reputation being painted already. It's like a Trojan horse.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Its image isn't yet. It's a free speech warrior zone. It's not that yet.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That whole concept now has unfortunately been associated with the right, which should create some sort of soul searching on the left. Like, how did the right take that notion from us? But that's a whole other conversation. So now you can't even calling it some kind of home of free speech is just going to be you're already marking it as something the respectable people don't want to be on board with. Weirdly, so you have to go.
That's right. You get really strong selection effects. So let's say you even didn't want it to be like that. If you make a platform which is like, we're only going to take down things that are directly threatening people with violence, like real basic stuff. It sounds good, and maybe that would have been a good way to start. But the way the environment is now, you'll select for all of the trolls and the cringe, and that's what your image is going to be, and it just accelerates.
Yeah, it's that Scott Alexander notion of attracting witches. You're right. If you're going to be a home a home for place for free speech that tolerates a few witches, it'll be overrun by witches. But I hear that, and it's stated almost as if it's some kind of rule of sociology or something. I don't think it needed to be, because in the U.S. at least, let's say the year is 1980, and you're a free speech liberal. You don't think of the notion of free speech as being just completely trashed by association with apologists for Pol Pot. Your conservative critics would say that, but people who are somewhere between left and right wouldn't have thought that. Now that people who are sort of independent, not quite left or right, they are buying the notion that free speech means a haven for assholes and scoundrels. So, this idea that if you're for free speech, you're going to be overrun by witches, it doesn't seem like some kind of hard and fast rule of free speech norms. It just seems like something that has been historically contingent only in recent times. What do you think? I don't know.
Yeah, it seems new.
Yeah.
I can't think of any historical analogies that's quite the same. Because I usually hear about Martin Luther in books, and that's similar to our era, where we've got a lot of chaos around the traditional structures of the way people get information being disrupted, and like fake news and fervor and religiosity creating even more chaos. But that doesn't exactly quite align with like a free speech zones. I don't remember anything like that from the era. I don't know.
Yeah, see, like up until basically 5 minutes ago, I thought it was like, an expression of commitment to free speech would attract like sane, reasonable people, and that the people who said I'm not into free speech would be attracting the unreasonable, terrible scoundrels and assholes. And only since about like 2015 or so has it actually seemed true that free speech attracts all kinds of having to defend bad people.
Yeah.
It's so yeah. I mean, I was in the late 70s, and so through the 90s, when I was, in the 80s, I was too young to know anything about politics, to think about this at all. But in the latter half of the 90s, I started thinking about that, and I thought of smart, reasonable people being the ones who are signed on to the free speech thing, and that has absolutely changed in the past 20 years very gradually, and over the last 5 years very rapidly. And so now it seems very problematic and to be defending that, and you're really flirting with danger to do that. So the symbolism around that kind of commitment has completely changed. That's what's so disturbing.
Yeah, totally. And like I can't help my pattern recognition as well. Like it's a red flag for me. If someone's instantly mostly talking about free speech, I'm wondering, okay, it's kind of a trope for some people, and then other reasonable people talk about it much better. So I listen to those. But I guess I think like the distribution of personality types and temperament wouldn't have changed much over time. And I think we've always had a lot of closed-minded people, or people that are very impacted by their social status.
Yeah.
Unconsciously so. I think that's always been true. And the poles are changing, where to be open-minded and okay with the chaos, or like just more tolerant of things in general. It's no longer necessarily. It's more of a centrist thing now, I think, to have that personality type.
Yeah. So it seems like we've got the right wing, who's sort of. Let me back up 1 second. I think centrism is now being more of centrism is comprised now by a right wing affiliation than was the case before. How that came to be associated, how that was somehow plausibly owned by a bunch of malicious right wingers with bad intentions, is hiding a story of how the left gave up on it, because it would never have made sense for them to be able to plausibly take that from them, because it was, free speech was firmly in the left and liberal wheelhouse for decades. In my own lifetime, it just seemed rock solid. It was only in the last decade that somehow it was snatched from them by the right. And that has to be a tale of the left giving up on it, implicitly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So this precedes left-wingers noticing that the right is cynically using it and so wanting to distance themselves from it. Some kind of theoretical distancing happened even before that, you know?
I don't know how, I don't know whether it makes sense to say which thing happened first, because I think it's mutual. It's like, I think you started out saying it that way. You have to have both. And I think what it is just negative polarization. So it's like, it's most important to be against what other people are for when you're negatively polarized. And I think that explains a lot of politics in the States.
Yeah, I remember seeing a study once that said around 1980 is when people, at least in the U.S., a lot of political affect became more negative, and it was driven more by disdain and dislike for the other side than some kind of love for your own ideals. It started at the beginning of the Reagan era, and it's like just expanded like crazy. And I'm certain that it's some kind of non-linear path, right? It's just getting much worse very quickly. But only in the last 5 to 10 years, like a lot of things, something unique has happened in the last 5 to 10 years. I wish I could talk more about cultural change in the sense of music and film and fashion all changing quickly in the last 10 years, because that's a much funner thing to watch happen. But that seems to be stagnating. And now, by the way, I'm smuggling in other cultural topics and getting away from politics. But I'd like that to have changed more than political dynamics. Instead of fashions changing quickly, we have a kind of endless remixing and rehashing of 20th century styles in music and film. But politics seems to be changing in a very rapid way. So all the action is there now. But that's just yeah. I'm going to do a hard pivot to a different topic. In fact,
Yep.
The notion of retromania, which is the title of a Simon Reynolds book. He's a cultural critic who's written for The Wire magazine, and started talking a little over 10 years ago about how the YouTube generation is finding it too compelling to constantly indulge in retro film and music and whatnot and fashion instead of making their own thing. So we just, because of the presence of YouTube and because of the constant the ubiquity and omnipresence of 20th century media, no one's making anything new anymore, right? They're just it's all reboots and remakes. So it seems like possibly the only new fun thing to do is tinker with other things that we expected to move slowly and hurry up and upend those, like politics, right? So I don't know. Do you have any?
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on that. Like, I'm more pro. I think culture is actually more interesting now than it was before because it's better. Like, people, you watch a Netflix series now and you compare it to series of the past, it's just like,
oh yeah,
you can't compare it. It's so much better. And I think movies got a bit like remakes and old. It's like nostalgia for Gen X, but it's series where it's all at, and it's like a golden era for like really good stories in that medium. And it's not like you can't point to the fashion so much, but it's the technical, the production quality is just next level.
It really is. Yeah, there's we're so incredibly aware now of arguments and counter arguments and counter arguments that the second I put something out there and you counter with it, I'm already signing on, and it forces me to be a little more specific, right? Yes, it totally is a golden era of television for sure, more so than movies. And I remember about 10 years ago, it was Mad Men was hot at the time, the show Mad Men. Game of Thrones was just kind of getting off the ground. This was 2010, 2011. People are calling it a golden age of television. It clearly was way better than the stuff of the 80s and even a lot of the 90s, which just is kind of unwatchable now. There's all these little things that are almost too mundane to point out to in a way that people can identify right away. Just the way two people would stand in a room and talk to each other, and there's someone standing 5 feet away that is not supposed to hear them talking. Come on, right? So little things like that, they've updated for a more sort of generically intelligent audience generically intelligent in just that way, right? So in a sitcom, for instance, you've got two people huddled together. Hey, come over here. I'm talking to you. But yeah, again, this person's standing 5 feet away. How can they not hear that? Like, come on, please. So television's gone smarter in all these little ways, right down to the attention to detail for wardrobe. If, let's say, the show takes place in the 1880s, a show in the 1980s that took place in the 1880s would not have the same attention to detail and get as many things correct as a show now would that's set in the 1880s.
And these are all the production level things. It's also like the characters and stories. They build much deeper, more complex plots too.
Yes. You have more plot threads running simultaneously.
Yeah,
right.
and more depth to characters, more ambiguity. Is this person good or bad? It's not really about that. Like, there's a lot of complexity to the characters themselves that didn't exist before.
Yeah.
Or you get it in books, and now we're getting that in series.
Yeah. That's actually a good aspect, I think, of shows being more. They literally move quicker now. You know, you see more cuts, more edits. You know, a one shot transitioning to another shot. Let's say two people in a diner, Breaking Bad. You know, I'm going to go back to Breaking Bad. People speaking in a diner. They cut to a shot of the parking lot. Then they cut to a shot of the laboratory. It moves much quicker, which, you know, in a sense suggests that people are dumber because they need things to be moving quicker. But in this case, it's not things getting dumber. It's just it's indicative of an audience getting smarter and needing to have their senses stimulated faster as far as new information to process. So things moving quicker does not always mean it's because people are dumb and have short attention spans. It's because they're smart enough to have already taken the information on board and they're hungry